can now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Mohammed?
Here.
Ms. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. As we start each board meeting, it bears reminding that the mission of the Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in a first-class education for a changing world. Before we go any further, thank you to Connor Childers, who is working behind the scenes to produce the boards broadcast via YouTube live stream and Comcast Channel 20. We are now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the right of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you will be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It is not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. If you look to your left, you will see 2 digital clocks. One shows the total time allotted to public comments, and one shows the total time for each speaker. We thank you for your interest and for your cooperation with our guidelines. We have 1 speaker tonight, Mr. Scott Jensen, if you would come forward and turn on your mic.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, staff, and also community. I have prepared some comments, and I'm going to call my comments called Gold Star Deserved. Perhaps you can remember as a child, the gold star was placed on your sheet when excellence was achieved on an assignment, a test, or at a music lesson. As adults, gold stars should also be recognized. In many communities across the nation, the American Marxist movement seeks to replace our history by taking down monuments or renaming our facilities with another deserving recognition. This did not occur on Friday, September 24th, 2021 in Rockford, Illinois. The Lee Marks Memorial Track was dedicated with updating of the Swanson Stadium sign. The event was of great honor to my former coach, but more importantly, it is a great honor to the community and his family. It was a blessing to see the Marks unveil the new sign and participate in their joy with this honor to Lee Marks. The honor given for excellence in making an impact on the lives of students was for many years of service. My experience with Coach Marks was only for that of a couple years, but I wholeheartedly concur with others who knew of his service much longer duration than I. That honor is well deserved. In my opinion, the honor given to Lee Marks is compounded with the association of another great man, Jack Swanson. Jack was one of my Guilford High School principals. He was a man of great character and known for his love of students. I count it a privilege to have known both men well as a student at Guilford High School. Conclusion? Both are great men, and changing the entrance sign was most appropriate. Rockford's public schools.
Thank you. If you could sort of wrap things up, your 2 minutes is over.
Rockford Public Schools deserves receiving a gold scar from the community for the honor and respect given for us for dedicating the Lee Marks Memorial Track on Friday. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you. We are now on to board member comments. Are there any board member comments? Ms. Mohammed.
Yes, I wanted to take a brief moment to give a shout out to 3 principals that I had the pleasure of meeting with over this past week. Mrs. Keffer from Auburn High School, Mr. Sayer from Westview Elementary School, as well as Mr. Hand from Welsh Elementary School. As a board member, personally, it's important for me to make sure that I'm introducing myself to the schools in my sub-district and beyond, and just seeing the different ways that I can be supportive and to just learn more about the efforts that our staff are putting forth with our students in this upcoming school year. I especially was impressed by Mr. Hand from Welsh that took the time out to not only walk me through their goals that they set for increasing the reading scores with the students, but just also just explaining to me just step by step just where they have started at and where they plan to go. So I just want to commend these 3 for their hard work, and I want to encourage other parents in the community as well as community leaders to get to know the principals at these schools, because it's not just up to them to make sure that our children are successful. It's not just up to the board or administration. It's going to take all hands on deck in order to truly help our kids with being successful.
Ms. Pearson.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment. I have gotten many phone calls and emails in regards to certain activity at some of our schools. So I just want to send a kind message with all due respect to our parents and to our students. It is an overwhelming challenge to advocate for those who send a message through their actions that they simply don't care about receiving an education. And it is saddened to have to be confronted with such dilemmas in a time that we're living in. So I want to encourage parents, specifically to some that are single, that are working, and I can only imagine how challenging it is. But please understand, if your child is disobedient to you, and you can't get them motivated to achieve, consider how much more difficult it is for those who have to teach them. That being said, despite of what may appear to be, we still have an obligation to do what we can to make sure that we are educating our students. So we don't want to prejudge because of their circumstances, and we don't want to give up on them because it appears that they don't care. And I'm really asking that we make sure that we are utilizing the resources made available to us to meet those needs and identify core issues and help them deal with that, so every student can be successful in obtaining their education. Thank you.
Any other board member comments? If not, the next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
And for my report, we will be moving right into our tier 3 report on the freshman academy. So I'm going to turn it over to the team because they have a very comprehensive report, and I would prefer we spend our time working on that.
Good evening. Tonight we are giving the year-end analysis on the academic return on investment freshman academy study. It is just slightly different than the Tier 3 end of the year analysis that you received a couple of weeks ago with Reading Horizons. Reading Horizons was more curriculum based and the diagnosis of that and the implementation, where our Freshman Academy really is looking at a collaborative approach to engage students. And so there is a different kind of methodology and approach as we talk about strategies further on in the presentation, where it really is about implementation from teacher all the way up to central office and working together to make sure that we're implementing strategies with fidelity to ensure that we are engaging our young folks. So Freshman Academy, it is the foundational year of our academy model. It is all ninth grade students at our 4 main high schools. We did omit Roosevelt for this study because of the process and how they enroll freshman students in the rolling enrollment and the approach to their education. So the data represents just our 4 main high schools. We launched the academy model back in 2013 and 14, and really the hub of academies, and especially Freshman Academy, is our small learning communities. And we'll discuss the small learning communities, often referred to as SLCs, later on in the presentation and how they could be effective. So why Freshman Academy? If the board remembers, when we just developed our PDSA and our tiered model, we broke things into Tier 2 and Tier 1 and brought to the board the opportunity to suggest and recommend which Tier 3 studies that we participated in. And the board chose Reading Horizons, which we updated a couple of weeks ago, and also Freshman Academy. Not only that, but Freshman Academy is a key strategy to meeting one of our universal goals, which is to increase the freshmen on track to 75% by 2024. Additionally, looking at Freshman Academy and how we might be able to engage our students across all of our high schools also addresses our equity imperative to ensure that we're providing high quality experiences for all students, no matter what school you attend. So why is Freshman on Track so important? Well, we spend a significant amount of time, money, resources on our freshman students, only to lose a third of them by the end of the year as being off track. Now, we know that Freshman on Track is the #1 predictor and indicator of graduation success and why we spend so much time analyzing and working on our freshmen. But we also know that it can't start just at freshman year. Through our system-wide framework, we've developed universal goals that are in elementary school and middle school with our numeracy and literacy at 3rd grade, as well as our on track in middle school, to make sure that we're onboarding our students before they get to freshman year so that we can continue to build on what has been established prior to 9th grade. So for the purpose of this study and the parameters of this study, really low engagement is the key that we're seeing, and the students who exhibit low engagement are the ones that are benefiting the least from our Freshman Academy. We really want to make sure that we're addressing the importance of building relationships in our SLCs within this work to help drive engagement. And we also analyzed, as part of one of our definitions of success, students who scored higher on a question with our engagement survey of, I continue steadily toward my goal of graduating, tended to have a higher relationship in terms of on track. And so this type of engagement will be discussed in our college and career readiness class that Bridget French will discuss later in the presentation. So are the students on track? As one of our definitions of success, we established that we wanted that 75% of our students to be on track. At the end of this study, we concluded that we had 66.8% of our students who met that criteria of being on track. The other definition of success was student engagement. And we were really looking at least 50% of our students who would show an engagement from the fall survey to the spring survey. We would exclude students who scored 100% in the fall, as there is no growth from 100%. And so our goal and definition of success was 50%, and we landed this last year at 42.7. So from an academic return on investment model, we are recommending to the board that we keep Freshman Academy, that we continue to study it, but we also implement some fixes as we look at school year 22. So we'll talk and discuss tonight strategies for FY22 and how we might continue to look at engagement, building relationships with our students, and monitor that implementation with fidelity. And I will turn it over to Bridget French.
Thanks, Matt. So currently we offer 2 opportunities for students to understand what it means to be college, career, and life ready. These classes are high school readiness, which is the 2nd semester of 8th grade, and college and career readiness, which is a year-long course in 9th grade. These classes are the noble intention of ensuring all students have access to the resources that only some of our students get at home. We realize not all students have conversations around the dinner table about what it means to be college and career ready, and we want to provide all of our students an opportunity to explore their interests and learn what's available to them in the region. The class was designed to do quite a few things: explore personal characteristics, likes, dislikes, analyzing viable career options and opportunities in the region, understanding the impact of their choices and the choices that they make at school and in their lives, professional communication, and diversity and inclusion. The key to this course is to allow students to drive their learning, but to also focus on the things that we often say kids today don't know. Like, do you want to learn how to sew a button? We can teach you that. Do you want to change a tire? We can teach you that. Do you want to write a meaningful thank you note? We will teach you that. We've begun monthly professional development with our teachers and our college and career readiness teachers that teach the 9th grade course, and we'll begin the same PD with our 8th grade teachers in the spring. And what will be different for students as a result of this PD is that students will be able to drive their learning. We want them to be able to identify why they're learning, what they're learning, and carry that through their high school career. We want a greater emphasis on exploration of interests and careers. We want them to visit the pathway classes of their upperclassmen. We want them to go back to the Academy Expo this year on October 20th, and we want them to carry that through their year by bringing community members into the classroom that help them understand all of the careers that exist in our region. And we want students to have fun. This is a class that should be enjoyable, that students should really look forward to. What will be different for teachers is focus on skills connected to the workforce. Some people call them soft skills, some people call them employability skills. And we also want to shift our grading practices. We have many new teachers teaching this courses, or teachers that are new to teaching this course. And we want to shift to learning to grade based on the skills attained rather than tests or memorization of rote content. Again, we want students to be facilitators and drive their learning. And we want our teachers to focus on creating a comfortable space for student belonging. This course is really designed to focus on the relational work. How am I connecting with my students and creating a sense of place for them so that they feel comfortable to explore their own interests? As you recall, when we began this study, we looked at beginning to measure the effectiveness of our SLCs, but as we did that, we realized that our Freshman Academy principals needed some professional development. And so we connected them with a national equity project, and as a result, we designed an additional probe with our NEP partners for that work. So as Mr. Zedeker said, SLCs is a very critical and important component to the Academy model. And part of our work includes increasing engagement in our SLCs. So we thought it was important to create a reminder of the difference between PLCs and SLCs. The SLCs really are different because they focus on a holistic approach to learning. There are 2 key aspects to the SLC. One is focusing on instruction, but not in the way that the PLC does. In high school, we should be talking about embedding academy themes into core content areas and taking those pathway themes and drawing that connection between the English, the math, the social science, and what the academies focus on. And then really driving student belonging and addressing student needs through data. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brunson.
Thank you. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the work that was done with NEP around addressing the deficit mindset. And for those who are not familiar with the deficit mindset, it really is about how the adults see the students and how they're focused on the students, looking at them as assets and what they bring to the table, as opposed to only focusing on the things that they cannot do yet. And so I want to talk about the difference between the deficit-based thinking is really about problems and how to fix the problems, us versus them, and that people can't be trusted to control or make their own decisions. And so when you're looking at our students, you got to look at them through what do they bring, what strengths do they have, and instead thinking about what can I do, what can we do, what can you do, and it's really about shared hopes and aspirations, and that everyone can make a contribution. It's about co-creating, like Ms. French said, having a more holistic approach to it and thinking about co-creating those experiences and conditions with students and providing them with a strong sense of belonging, but from thinking of what they can do and what they can bring as co-creators of their own learning. Last year, and we'll be continuing this work this year, with NEP, the equity team worked on some listening systems, so they did some listening sessions. And I was doing some looking through some historical data and read through some of the copious notes that were given to me by Kathy Baer. And so I came across one of this particular poem that really, it is like the connective tissue between understanding relational and technical work. A lot of what you're going to hear about is what Freshman Academy is, the things that Freshman Academy can provide, but really the connective tissue is the relationships that adults will have with students and their belief in the students. And so this one stuck out to me, and this is from one of our students. And I'll just read it. And it says, I woke myself up because we ain't got no alarm clock. We ain't got an alarm clock. Dug in a dirty clothes basket because ain't nobody. Washing my uniform. Brushed my hair and my teeth in the dark because the lights ain't on. Even got my baby sister ready because my mama wasn't home. Got us both to school on time so we eat a good breakfast. Then when I got to class, the teacher fussed because I ain't got no pencil. The reality is, instead of looking at this young man as from a deficit model, thinking about him being unprepared, instead of thinking about, if you read that, look how resilient he is, look how responsible he is, look how all of the things that he did just to get himself and his sister ready for school. And that's how we have to look at our students, but what do they bring as assets? A very simple thing is provide them with a pencil, right? Instead of thinking of him as unprepared and irresponsible, think about his assets and what he actually brings to the table. And that was just an illustration of that. The next, quickly, Morgan Gallagher is going to come up and talk about this. And so if you're really thinking about this whole system, the levers for success, making sure that the things that we are intentionally doing for our students are systemically aware, they're evidence-based, and he's going to talk about how to use data to intentionally make decisions, educational decisions. Being institutionally focused, like how can we make sure that we're providing what our students need, and that this is going to be something institutionally we can do it all for high schools. And then, of course, being equity advancing, and more importantly, thinking about being race conscious, because a lot of the decisions that we're making have racialized outcomes, intentional or unintentional. And so thinking about this as a systemic and institutional, evidence-based, equity advancing, and race conscious. Those things are very important for our students to be successful. Mr. Gallagher?
So as Tiffany mentioned, we're going to take a much more deliberate approach, I believe, this year, enhancing the use of data to how we target our students for support and what kind of supports we provide to the students depending on the seasonality of the work. So with our SLCs, we're going to be looking at the who and the when. How are we going to intentionally target students and strategies and supports for them according to the seasonality of the work? And while we're predominantly focused on how we're going to use data within our smaller learning communities, it also plays an important role in our professional learning communities as they work within their content areas to normalize their teaching practices regarding grading, engagement, and et cetera. As Bridget had mentioned, through NEP, we had all of our Freshman Academy assistant principals participate in the Freshman Success Institute last year, and that was really to grow their leadership capacity. Now that we've established that, we are in a place where I am going to be working with all of our Freshman Academy assistant principals, where we are going to have bi-weekly meetings where I really work to grow their technical capacity in the work and how they're following practices that are more data aligned, where the data is informing the decision making that's taking place. So I know for any of the board members maybe who have had the opportunity to visit an other district that follows the academy model, or if you'd had the opportunity to visit Nashville, you would see that their smaller learning communities have their team rooms where they have the data walls that are in place. And effectively what we're going to be able to do this year with how we've enhanced our data management system is that we're going to go beyond what you saw in Nashville, where they're affixing static data to a wall, to where instead we're going to have digitized tool for the teachers and the teams to be able to pivot the data or filter the data or sort the data according to a variety of very useful metrics. And that is what I'm going to get into in just a minute in a couple of slides. But really, when we don't want data to be a four-letter word. When our teachers are using it in their SLCs, we don't want there to be a sentiment that data rules the world. The data means nothing if it's not user-friendly in terms of its interface for the people who are using it. So it's got to be very user-friendly for the teachers. So in terms of making it useful for the teachers, we've enhanced how the data can be drilled down more to the student level to show more nuance in terms of the student's performance. As I had mentioned earlier, we provide the ability to pivot, sort, filter the data in a variety of ways for them. And we're really making the interface with the data simplified for the teachers. So we're not going to be looking, I know you may be familiar with ISBE's rules for how they calculate the final freshman on track at the end of each year's, and it's a rather complicated calculation that really doesn't make sense as it's facing teachers. So when the teachers are looking at their students and they're trying to identify which students are we going to support at which time of the years, and depending on the time of the year, the seasonality of the work, what are we going to do for those students? Simplifying it to where when they're looking on the dashboard, green students, they're passing all their classes. A yellow student would be failing one course, and a student that would be identified in red would be failing 2 or more courses. And here's an example of a couple different ways that we could be more intentional and deliberate with the data. So if you look, I had already mentioned a yellow student would be a student fit with 1 F. A red student would be identified as a student with 2 or more Fs. Again, depending on the seasonality of the work, that's going to really drive how you approach the interventions that you're going to do with kids. So for example, if you look at these 2 boxes on the left-hand side of this chart, those are showing what would traditionally be first quarter and second quarter, all of them together being first semester. And what you see with that blue line going across there is a typical trend line that you would see in the percentage of freshmen that are on track throughout the course of the year. And this is a trend line that you would see really almost with small degrees of variance, it would follow these typical hills and valleys at just about any traditional high school that you would visit, regardless of demographics. And so when you're looking at this, we want to make sure that our SLCs are being very intentional. Right now, we're at the very beginning of the school year. When they're identifying the students that are going to need the most intensive supports at the beginning of the school year, it's going to be those students that are failing multiple Fs. And what they're going to be doing in terms of targeting supports with those students, as Bridget alluded to through the CCR courses, is really making sure what is our plan for having providing a sense of belonging to these students, to building strong relationships, so that the more Fs that a student has, the more formalized the process has to be for tracking these students, to making sure that they have strong relationships with their teachers and with their peers. And that could be, say, through having a teacher identified as a mentor, in which the student would have to check in and check out every day at the beginning of the school year. Conversely, for those students that are in the yellow, that are only failing one course, you would want to start targeting those, teachers would want to start targeting those students for priority interventions in their classroom as we get towards the end of the semester, because if you only have 2 to 3 weeks left and you have a student that's identified in the yellow, that means they only have one F. That one F is only with you. You're the only person in this building who has the ability to turn it around and help this child pass all of their classes. Again, going back to the seasonality of the work, if you look at the purple circle with the arrow on this graph here for the freshmen on track, across the board you will historically see that the largest, most precipitous drop in freshmen on track is always the first 2 to 3 weeks of second semester. So we want our SLCs to be very intentional, and really our PLCs. What are we doing in terms of the curriculum that we're providing, the instructional strategies that we're using? That 3 weeks of first semester has got to be where we pour a significant, disproportionate amount of time and energy into making sure it is very highly scaffolded for the students and that it's very highly engaging. This is the time of the year when you would want to make sure that you have a curriculum that is very student-centered, where students really feel strong ownership over the activities that they're participating in their classrooms. And now just showing some examples of how we've drilled the data down a little bit deeper. What you see on your left is maybe what would traditionally be utilized in a smaller learning community when they're trying to identify which students they're going to support. One important change that we made for this school year is that on our progress reports and on our report cards at the secondary level, our grades are no longer going to be reported in an alpha value, but instead in a numeric value. So that when teachers are looking at a report card or a progress report, instead of just seeing student A has 3 Fs, they'll be able to click on student A on this dashboard, and they'll be able to see what the numeric value of those Fs are. That's something that is going to be highly leverageable, because if you look, for example, at student A and student B, and you're able to click on these students on the digital dashboard so that you see this additional information, you could see, yes, both of these students both have 3 failing grades, but they're very different failing grades. Student A has relatively high numeric values for his Fs at a 54, 53, 56, whereas student B has a couple of grades where the numeric value is significantly lower, and that student has much further to climb in order to be on track and be passing those classes. So by giving our smaller learning communities this ability to drill in deeper, what the conversations they'll be able to have is they'll see student A, all right, look, us 3 teachers where this student has a failing grade, yes, he's got Fs, but they're in the 50s. Let's make sure that we target our supports. Let's the 3 of us work together very intentionally with what we're doing in the classroom to help this student get back on track. Student B, that might not work when that student has a 16% or a 26%. So now these teachers are going to be able to identify this student is going to need more additional supports outside of maybe what can just be provided into the classroom. And so they'll coordinate additional push in or pull out supports for those students. What may be the case right now at a high school, as an example, is that you would have a intervention catalog that you would follow, or a flow chart where you say, okay, whenever we have a student with 3 Fs, we're just going to assign that student to lunchtime tutoring. But then what could happen is that you get a higher student to tutor ratio when you're doing that. Whereas here, if we can say, well, actually, there's some nuance here. This student with the 3 Fs that are a higher value, we can take care of that student in the classroom if those teachers are being very intentional in how they coordinate their supports for that kid. And then we can really focus our tutoring time on those students that maybe have the lower numeric values for their failing grades. And in doing that, you would have a much smaller ratio of students to the tutor during maybe that lunchtime tutoring or after school tutoring. Here's another example of how the information can be pivoted, and I did allude to this, but this is pretty powerful. Here you would have a pivot where on the dashboard, this would be a teacher-facing one, where teacher 1 could click on their name, and it would have the drop-down of the students that are in the yellow and the red. This is really powerful information for the teachers to have, to see those students that are in the yellow. This is something where, like, if you look at East High School, for example, East had good growth in their freshmen on track. They're actually at the goal of 75%. A big part of how they got there is using data in a very similar fashion to this, but it was a very manual process, a labor-intensive process for them to be able to aggregate the data and to be able to disseminate it appropriately to the teachers, whereas now the teacher is able to just click on their name, see those students in the yellow who only have that 1 F, and recognize right away, I'm the only person in this building that can really do anything to ensure that this kid is passing all their classes. These are the students that I should set as my priority when I'm providing Tier 1 instruction. Another couple ways to pivot, I had mentioned that when you get towards the last couple or 3 or 4 weeks of the semester, time becomes a serious constraint in terms of being able to support students. So you want to be very intentional. You want to identify who are those kids that are right on the bubble, who are on the cusp, so that you could say, if we're 3 weeks out from the semester, maybe we're starting to focus on looking at our kids that have a 57%. When we're 2 weeks out, maybe we're looking at 58%. 1 week out, maybe we're looking at our students that have a 59%, so that again, we're maximizing the opportunity to have as many students passing all their classes as possible. And then just another example of how the dashboards will be able to pivot. Here, this would be all those other ones where maybe how SLCs would be utilizing the data to target students and supports. But there's a lot of great conversations that can happen with professional learning communities in their content areas, where in integrated math 1, for example, maybe they can see that they have a total of 58 Fs, and they can see what the distribution of Fs is by teacher, so that they can start to have some conversations in their PLC meetings. Are we all normalizing our practices? You know, if we have somebody who's given out just 1 F and somebody who's given out 23 Fs, are we actually teaching the same thing with the same scope and sequence, and our grading practices the same? So again, another opportunity for very rich conversation around helping our students to be scaffolded for success. You know, I'll say I just want to finish by stating that having worked more closely now in this capacity as chief of schools with our freshman academy assistant principals, working more with freshman academy counselors and teachers, we really have some phenomenal staff out there that very much believes in our students' ability to be successful, and who really confident that we can get to that 75% freshman on track and beyond. And if I was just going to do some quick and dirty math, If we want to go from 66.8% of our freshmen on track to 75% on track, we're talking about a difference of 140 more students being successful. That dirty math breaks down to about 35 more students at each of the high schools being successful over last year. We have over 35 teachers at each of our high schools that are teaching freshman students. So that if we have the tools and the systems in place that they are equipped with to identify who are the right students to target and what are we going to do for them at what point in the year, we really just need each teacher to be able to be successful with just one more student being on track. Thank you all.
Questions from the board? Ms. Pearson?
Yes, I do have a question, and this sounds like a great plan. Two things come to mind, and that is time and accountability. So with the percentage rate of our failing students, how would there be the necessary, where will they get the time from, and how are we going to hold them accountable to carry out what they identify?
Pearson, I think I can start with the accountability and then I'll turn it over to the team, but it starts with my personal accountability as the superintendent. So we wrote our goals together to make sure that one of the terms of my employment and continuing in this role is by 2024 we will achieve that goal. We have taken that and our other goals and we've kind of named those as universal goals in the system, and then we've baked those into the way we evaluate the performance of schools at the high school level in particular, but there are also middle school goals that I have that are tied, and so we really have that starting with me and flowing through the system, and this becomes something that each high school would be accountable for as well. In terms of the time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gallagher to talk about that.
It's going to look different at every high school. We want to make sure that we're balancing that accountability with flexibility to meet the unique needs of the demographics that they're serving. So whereas one high school might focus more on lunchtime tutoring, another one might want to focus more on after school. You might have a high school that maybe wants to try and build in some push in or pull out MTSS opportunities into their master schedule during the school day, or they may want to try and address something in 0 hours. So it's really, again, balancing that accountability piece with the flexibility to meet the needs of their schools.
So that really is not necessarily a definitive answer, because now when you say flexibility, are you saying if they have the time, that's fine, or they're going to fit it in where they can? Or do you foresee any designated, appointed, blocked out time to really identify with the students that are failing?
The smaller learning communities all have a scheduled meeting time that they follow to be able to not just talk about the student interventions, but as Ms. French had mentioned, to also plan how they're gonna embed like project-based learning or academy themes into the core content areas to further engage the students in their education. So there is a very regular structure and cadence to how they meet and talk about students. And this just helps to provide a little bit more structure to that process so that it's more data driven when they're doing the identifying the students for intervention and determining what interventions to provide. I will say additionally, you know, we have a wonderful NTSS manual that has just been pushed out to the schools. It nears 100 pages and provides very thorough guidance on how NTSS can be integrated at the schools while still, again, allowing for that flexibility for how students are served within that tiered model of supports and intervention.
I also want to take an opportunity just to remind again that through the system-wide framework, not only is it, Dr. Jarrett's universal goal and our district's universal goal, but it's also the principal's evaluation. As part of their evaluation is the universal goal of freshmen on track. Secondly, schools have accountability for the way that they implement MTSS in their school through the standards of practice. It's the one measure that goes all the way from early childhood through 12th grade. So there's a variety of ways within the entire system that we're monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of MTSS, from how time is structured in the school to the student result.
Thank you. And what would be the check-in points? Like how would we really know that we're on track in monitoring that all of the details happen?
I'll start with the cabinet first. On a weekly basis, it's now every Tuesday, we monitor attendance data and we monitor on track in real time. We're just starting to do that. Next week will be the first week we do it because we've got kind of the school year up and running, and school level teams will do that as well. So they should be on a weekly basis checking in on how their data is going at the school level. But we're looking at the district level data by school and focusing on freshmen, but also actually all 6th through 12th grade students on track rates so that we can intervene as a district. Schools are doing that in problem solving teams, content area teams, or in these freshman level teams, and they're diving in much deeper. So we're keeping an eye on the big picture, and then those individual schools and teams within the schools are monitoring right down to the individual student level to make sure each student is getting what he or she specifically needs.
So for that weekly meeting, the individuals bringing this information to you will let you know the success rate and where they're at?
That's right. We generate a weekly report that shows, we started doing this last year during the pandemic, actually, and we're continuing the practice moving forward. But we aren't looking at individual student names at our level, although I suppose we could drill down. But really what we're looking at is how each school is doing that week on a week-to-week basis, so that we can all see if there are areas where we may need to provide additional district support or coaching. And then obviously at the school level, that's breaking down to teams of teachers, all the way down to individual teachers, all the way down to individual students.
Okay, thank you.
You indicated that the definition, the ISBE definition of students on track is complicated, but is there like a simple executive summary you can give us?
Yes, certainly. It is that you can only have one core content failure and that you would be passing 10 classes, but our requirements are different at RPS. So like when we're looking at it for ourselves, we would want them to be passing 12, but ISBE is passing 10 classes and not only having one failure in a core content area. Part of the reason why that is, besides it's not maybe all that much nuanced in terms of how ISBE calculates it, but a reason that it doesn't make sense when you have a team of teachers talking about which students they want to identify for intervention is that if you were to use those ISBE guidelines, you would effectively be discounting failures in elective areas or PE or otherwise. And when teachers are talking together about the failing grades that students have in their classes, you want the teachers to be saying that an F is an F is an F. It doesn't matter if it's going to be PE or an elective or a core content area, because that just creates an immediate divide in terms of expectations from the different teachers.
Well, that gives me a lead in for something I was going to mention that we may talk about a different day, which is that RPS has graduation requirements that are higher than the state requires and that any of the surrounding districts require. And we did that deliberately, and I was on the board when we did that. And the question is whether, we want to, as a board, revisit that, because in some ways we're just shooting ourselves in the foot and by having higher requirements than anybody else seems to have. So, one question I've got is, another question I've got is, are there particular courses that are problems that we know are problems, especially at the freshman level, where kids are flunking at a disproportionate rate?
We do. We know that integrated math is a problem. Integrated math 1, just like algebra was a problem previously. It's also another reason why we have that as a standard of practice, so that we have focused attention around it. We know that our college and career readiness course is a high failure course, and Ms. French went over what will be changing this year to help us focus our energy there as well. We also know that global studies can be a challenge, and then under global studies is biology. So those kind of go in order. Integrated math at the top of the list, followed by college and career readiness, followed by global voices, followed by biology. But what we find is oftentimes students are failing multiple core courses at a time. But some of our highest failure rate is in math.
And that's consistent with what I remember a discussion that we had a couple of years ago, which is the reason I asked the question. So when we talk about pushing some things down to 8th grade in order to help the freshman on track rate, have we looked at specifically the math and whether there are things that we can be doing different at the middle school level, and particularly 8th grade, to help get kids ready for that math course in their freshman year?
Before we dive into the specifics of math, one of the reasons we set the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade on track level and a 5 percentage point increase in the universal goals is because one of the issues we think we have is a culture of a mindset of passing classes being more tightly embedded into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade experiences for our students. So that's more of a global solution. And then specifically, Mr. Rollins, I know you want to dive into the math, so I'll turn it over to the team to talk in more detail about that. But I think that is one of the real problems, is that in theory, students, other than their 8th grade year, where we do have some mandatory summertime interventions, while there are interventions that students receive, we think there are more things we can do to establish a culture of no excuses, making sure we go above and beyond to support students and their passing rates in middle school, because we think some of the patterns that happen freshman year are established in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or even going all the way back to early literacy, frankly. So with that, I'll turn it over to talk more about math to the team.
So math is another area of focus in our standards of practice, and it's another thing that is a through line from early childhood through high school. And when we're talking about prepping students to be successful in higher level math, we're actually talking about having deeper levels of mathematical discourse in the classroom. What does that mean? It means we want kids talking about math to each other, collaborating to solve complex problems. It doesn't work if we teach it that way in elementary, and then we go to a traditional sort of math fact-based approach in middle school and then expect them to be successful in integrated math, where the teaching model has them doing exactly that, working in teams and solving complex problems. So what we've done in the standards of practice is put the focus in middle school on number talks, the way that students are engaging with and talking about math. Now, to your point, that's not probably enough. We know that we had our very first our very first curriculum that we designed as a part of our 5-year plan was middle school math. So it is at this point right now where we're going back and looking through to do some refinements. We have an instructional resource adoption that will be coming up in the next year or so, and that gives us another chance to do some refresh. But most importantly is the instructional shift of having students engage with deeply talking about math.
Okay, in a typical, so you talked about push in and pull out resources. In a typical freshman schedule, do they have the time that if they need more work in math, do they have an open hour that we can start running remedial courses or additional support courses for them?
Okay, I'll start and you can pick up. How about that? We've seen this done a couple of different ways in our high schools over the last couple of years. They've been pretty creative. In one school, they identified sort of midway through the semester the students that really needed some in-time recovery, and they started running a second section of integrated math 1, and they started kind of looping, repeating concepts. In another school, at the end of the semester, if you had failed semester 1, you took semester 1 and semester 2 concurrently at the end of the year. Another approach was to take semester 1 only as a repeat in semester 2 and then push semester 2 into the summer. So there's been various efforts over the years. There's also opportunity with high school students having a 50-minute lunch period to use half of that time for in-the-moment tutoring with a math teacher. That's been done across the board. Mr. Gallagher, you want to share some more examples?
Well, I would just say we have a unique opportunity this year too with all the ARP ESSER dollars that we have received. A good portion of those dollars are earmarked for addressing learning loss. And so this is gonna provide an opportunity across all grade levels to start getting really creative and getting ideas from the principals and their school leadership teams for like at early childhood and elementary, what are some ways that we can build or structure more time into the day before school, after school, during lunchtime, like Heidi said, to address or remediate skills, or at the secondary level, you know, what are some ways that we could, at the middle school level, where we could provide some creative opportunities for how we structure time with these additional funds so that there can be course recovery, or even thinking about how at the high school level, how Roosevelt has traditionally been the centralized location where we have the opportunity for credit recovery with the competency-based program at Roosevelt in night school and summer school. What if we could start to see some of that exist in the home high schools themselves so that we didn't have that additional barrier or roadblock for students to be able to recover those courses? So there's a lot of great opportunities for some conversation this year for how we're gonna address exactly that.
I guess part of my question is we have a 7-period day. What's a typical freshman schedule? I should know because I've got a freshman, but I don't. So
They have their sort of 5 classes that they have to take, plus college and career readiness, and then they have space for 1 elective.
okay, so that space for the 1 elective is something that potentially could be used for additional resources or additional interventions.
Yeah, it could. And I think to go back to sort of like the majority of the problem solving we want to see happening on a weekly basis in real time as we're responding, rather than at the end of the term when the failure has happened. So we want to see fewer needs to have extra time, more classes to recover and do it again, because we've been more effective up front in identifying when students start to fail and be able to give them the supports in real time.
Oh, wrong button. There we go. I hit the red button. I don't know. What does the red button do? I hope that wasn't the ejector seat. The other thing that we've made a big investment in is staffing dollars. And while I think principals have increasingly found creative ways to use those dollars, I think the increased focus from the system-wide framework, the increased focus on these team meetings, on the 75% short-term goal. Obviously, we want to go far beyond 75%. So you start talking about our high schools have probably about $1 million worth of differential staff, or pretty close to it, in each of their buildings. When you look at their Title I funds, when you look at ARP ESSER funds, when you look at Fund 10 and some differential dollars, they have really added a lot of coaching positions, and I don't mean athletic coaching, although they have those too, but instructional coaching, parent liaisons, all kinds of different staffing support that we can use to support teachers in this work as well. So we've also upped our investment in social work and a lot of other types of support for social emotional support as well. So I think high schools and middle schools are much better equipped than they once were because of those differential investments to support the whole child. Because some of this is academic, but some of it is a team effort around supporting the needs of the family and the child as well. And I think our schools are equipped to do that in a way perhaps they haven't been. That's that extra investment we've made in our schools with site-based budgeting. As evidence-based funding has poured in, that disproportionately has gone to buildings. And so we're excited about that potential as well. As we focus on this outcome, I think schools do have some extra resources that they can point at that focus, as well as the most important thing, which is the teaching, what we're doing with our teams of teachers.
So the red, yellow, green dashboard, my recollection when I saw in Nashville when they were doing something similar, they had other flags as well, and not just whether you were flunking core courses. They had internally decided that there were 2 or 3 or 4 factors that would predict student success, and they would flag students. They'd get a red flag based on a combination of those factors. And I do see in the appendix, if I'm reading this correctly, you know, where performance really falls off on being on track is when you get into the chronic truancy category. So, and I know this is apparently mostly for teachers, but are we going to, do we have some system where we don't just look at the number of courses failing, but some of these other factors as well, where kids are getting flagged based on some of these other factors?
We are in the final stages of integration right now for Panorama. If you'll recall, I presented that in the spring. We're getting ready to launch in about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. What that will do is provide these sort of thermometer dashboards for attendance, behavior, and academics. Also pulled into that will be the results of our SEL screener, so that you can look at grouping students and monitoring them based on a variety of different needs. And that might be different by each school, but they'll be able to triangulate data across multiple data points, so they really are looking at the whole child.
And again, we as a cabinet also look at attendance at all grade levels. That's another thing in our Tuesday meeting we look at as a potential global district look, but the teams will be diving deeply into that Panorama data.
Okay. I guess my last comment, this is sort of the good news, bad news. The data, the dashboards, I think that's exciting. I think this is the way we should be using data. The bad news, some of you have heard me say this before. I saw this in Nashville in 2011. I voted for the academies based on my understanding that we were going to be doing this. And it is 2021 now. So yes, I think we should be doing this, just like I thought we should be doing it in 2011. So let's get to work.
Will do.
Oh, Mr. Connor.
I think Mr. Siegel had his light on first.
Mr. Siegel.
I'm the youngest. I'm accustomed to going last. Go ahead, Mike.
I gotta do the math on that. So, you know, a couple points from my point of view. Number one, we've talked a lot about where we spend our time, and the fact is that this program is probably what I perceive as one of the times when both our intent and the implementation behind it has come together. And we've certainly talked about the importance of freshmen on track, and it's been known for a while, but it looks to my eye like we've taken an approach where we've got everything from engagement to attendance to academics that are all being tracked. We're sharing that with both the principals and with staff. So really, this is a case where we have said this is our goal, and now everything, if you will, comes together where the rubber hits the road. So it seems like I'm encouraged because we had different sections that one of you presented, and it's clear from my point of view that we've engaged across really the entire spectrum of the various aspects of our students, and that we're putting that into practice right where it needs to be in collaboration with teachers. And so I'm actually encouraged. We've talked for a long time about having all this come together, and whatever the timing is of it coming together, it's come together. And I think what I'm going to look for is the last statement Mr. Gallagher made, which is implementation with fidelity. And I would say that the engagement of the teachers, and we have our president and vice president of the REA, which I'm encouraged to see, and it sounds like there's engagement there. So it sounds like there's engagement at that teacher level, but importantly, there's accountability at that principal level, and that there's control over both budget, to support those goals. So I see a lot of things coming together, and so one of the things I was going to say is that I'm very encouraged by this, and I think now it's how are we going to follow through with that? And we're at the beginning of the year, and I look forward to seeing this, and I'm glad that it's numbers-based, 75%, so on and so forth, and that everybody understands these are important numbers and why we're doing it. So I will say I'm very encouraged.
Mr. Siegel, did you have?
Yeah, I've got very little to add now. You all did a really good job.
The old guy won on that one then, pal.
Nice work, man. Nice work. You did a really, really nice job on the presentation, and I think the people up here did a really good job of asking, the important questions. I guess to just go a little bit farther on the attendance, I haven't been doing this as long as Mr. Rollins or Mr. Connor, so I didn't see districts in other communities and how they were doing this and how they were successful. So I've just had to depend on a couple of books, but those books had linked attendance actually as the #1 factor, and then math, as the #2. And the conclusions of these books was, the kids can't learn if they're not in school, which I think is, pretty well understood. Yet I'm looking at the appendix and seeing some interesting numbers. Now, they're not giant numbers, but they're just interesting. If we look at the black students, those who are there 97 to 100% of the time are not as on track as their counterparts who are even there 0 to 91% of the time. And, I was thinking about this today and wondered why that would be. And Mr. Gallagher, you had said something that struck me as interesting. We're going to start looking at these Fs not as a letter value, but as a numeric value. And you brought up some big disparities. You had a student that was really close on all 3 of those Fs. And you had another student who was close on one and pretty far away on the others. And I'm just wondering if there's the possibility that, we're going to end up triaging some students and saying, okay, we can commit the resources to saving the kid who's close on all 3 classes. We got this kid who's so far away on 2. I guess it's just, I sat there conflicted thinking, on the one hand, I love the fact that you brought up a student who could possibly have that sort of a disparity in his Fs, or that sort of a deficiency in his Fs, and then say, here, we have a solution for him. And I really want to believe that we are going to put our full energy into making sure that even that student who's getting a 12% can still be successful in that class. So I know you can't just give me every assurance now, but it's just something to think about, that sort of triaging doesn't happen.
That is an excellent question that I absolutely anticipated, because it's spot on. We don't want to be using the data in a way where we're identifying who the bubble kids who we're going to save and then the kids that we're just going to give up on. That is absolutely not the intent. So if you revisit that slide as an example, what I'm trying to demonstrate in how we're looking at those 2 students differently is that where the one student had 3 Fs that were all very high in numeric value, in the way that SLC teams are structured now, those teachers in that team will be able to say, hey, we're not going to put this kid off to, say, tutoring or a 9th-hour remediation or after school. We can save this kid together in our classrooms so that that student with the very low Fs that is the one that can be targeted more so for having more intensive supports. And so that way we're not flooding and saying all the students with 3 Fs, you all just get the same X, Y, and Z. No, let's be really smart. Let's work with these kids in the classroom, prioritize them as my students, as their teacher for working in the classroom. But for that student B, then we clearly recognize, like, yeah, you still got to help them in the classroom, but we are going to give you more targeted supports that are on a much smaller, or on a more intensive scale, I guess you would say. So it's really about just being smart in how we're delegating who's doing what in terms of the interventions.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and the answer makes me go, but my next question is, have you done the analysis to find out how many of the students are likely to be at that 12%, 29% versus those who are at 56, 58, 59, and say, well, okay, we're actually only going to, prevent a few students from going to tutoring, when the reality is you may still have a whole ton of kids who need that extra intervention. Do you know yet if this is really going to be a big resource savings?
Unfortunately, we can't do that because with the values on the progress reports and the report cards last year being alpha, you can't drill down and see the numeric value. But I think more importantly than that, it's not trying to use the data to be very prescriptive in nature. I mentioned earlier that there's this level of accountability, but we also want our SLCs to have the flexibility that when they start looking at this data pivoted in all these different ways, that they're gonna come up with all kinds of creative solutions for how to address it for these kids that maybe we're not able to at our level because we're not working so closely with them.
And I would just add to that slightly that if there's a groundswell of students that are in that situation where they're 18%, 20%, and it's more than the few that we have the resources to target, it's not the students at that point. We have a system problem, and we need to ask what is not happening across all of these classes for the majority of students that's putting them in that situation. It's not intervening our way out through tutorial after tutorial after tutorial. It's bringing those groups of teachers together to say, what's happening with our system right now because it is not working for these kids, the majority of kids. That would be a shocking number that would require some action from all of the teachers and not just say, okay, well, now we need to hire more interventionists.
That would indeed be a shocking realization, but I think it's one that we probably need to be somewhat prepared for. And then because this touches my last point, while I'm really thrilled to see this attention and this on Freshmen on Track, and I love the strategies that were presented, it does feel a little bit like there isn't the ability to, I'm gonna say this differently, that we're not really targeting achievement on some of these basic mastery things. The numeracy, the literacy, which I think, as Dr. Jarrett alluded to, may need to go drive all the way down to early elementary. So while I'm really thrilled with all of this and think it's an important work for us to be doing, I'm actually kind of hopeful that this ends up exposing things like what you just said, that we have work to do further upstream. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we are now on to action items that proceeded through the Planning and Development Committee. Item 5A, resolution to adopt the 21-22 budget. This, again, reminder, this is the fiscal year that we are currently in. We've sat through last winter many presentations on the development of the budget. We had some amendments over the summer to adjust the revenue assumptions based on updated data that we've discussed in previous meetings. Is there a motion, a second, to approve item 5A, resolution to adopt the 21-22 budget?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
There are no follow-up items presented at the Committee of the Whole for this committee. We are now on to the consent portion of our meeting, which includes items previewed by board committee chairs during the Committee of the Whole meeting. Item 6, consent items from the Performance and Monitoring Committee. A, payroll. B, accounts payable. C, purchase orders. D, air travel. E, monthly cash and investment report, August 2021. F, construction pay request log. G, RPS managed work change order logs. And then item 7, consent items from the Governance Committee. A, meeting minutes from 9/14/21. B, contract purchase orders. C, freedom of information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Siegel.
7A.
Okay, please call the roll on the approval of consent items not pulled.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
Is there a motion and a second to approve item 7A, meeting minutes from 9/14/21? Nobody wants to move to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Abstain.
Mr. Connor?
Abstain.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 2 abstain, 1 absent.
I was worried there was something controversial in those minutes.
We just weren't here.
Let's see, we are now at the closed session consent agenda, including 8 closed session consent items. A, salary adjustment for bilingual tutors. B, HR organization report and addendum. 9, closed session consent items, student discipline, suspension, appeals, and expulsions, consisting of A, GDM 2057-21. The expulsion is held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion in abeyance agreement for the entire 2021-2022 school year. Item 10, closed session consent items, student discipline, EIAs. A, GDM 8239-21. B, GDM 8240-22. D, item C was pulled by the administration. D, GDM 8243-22. E was pulled by the administration. F, GDM 8245-22. G was pulled by the administration. H, GDM 8247-22. I, GDM 8248-22. J, GDM 8249-22. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any closed session consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Please call the roll on the approval of closed session consent items.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Abstain.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 abstain, 1 absent.
We're now at other business, new business agenda recommendations. I was just wondering if the administration could give us an update on our quarantining policies and the tests that are available for if we're doing this test to stay program.
Yes, absolutely. I'll turn it over to Mr. Zedeker to give a high-level overview and answer any questions the board may have.
Yeah, in terms of tests available for staff and students for test to stay protocol, that was a procedure and process that was established prior to some of the mandates that have come down recently from the state. So there is availability for both staff and students for unvaccinated to run through a protocol called test to stay. And what that entails is that if you're identified as a close contact, you would have the opportunity to test on day 1, day 3, day 5, and day 7 in order to stay in school, whether that's staff or student. And so that process is available. Where we run into some of the complications is in our community right now, our health systems are starting to get overwhelmed with the number of individuals who are requiring tests. And so if there are not available rapid tests that you can get results in a quick turnaround time, you may see your results in 48 to 72 hours, which really defeats the purpose of a test to stay kind of process. And so we did send an email outlining this process to our staff last Friday, but we did give the caveat that it is up to the availability of tests in our community throughout the health systems that they would have access to. And so that's where we're seeing the largest challenge in terms of the test to stay protocol.
So it has to be a specific test or the question that I got asked earlier this week was rapid tests are available now at Walgreens. So we will not accept tests from like a rapid test that you buy at Walgreens. I was told that they're the same tests that you would get at Physicians Immediate Care.
Yep, as long as the test is performed in front of a medical provider, we will not accept to buy those tests or get them ones shipped at home that you take it home and provide those results. Those are not accepted, but as long as it is done with a medical provider, that is what we would accept.
Okay. How is that working out? Like, I know that we've been quarantining some classes. Are kids able to actually do the test to stay? Are they doing it?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't have that data. We have had to quarantine some elementary classes based off of close contacts and contact tracing, but I don't have the data in terms of families or individual students taking advantage of that test to stay protocol.
All right, thanks. Are there any board member agenda items or board member action steps? Nope, everybody wants to go home. If there are no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board, I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much.